All right, we are live. Hi, I'm Luke, leading the CFO Connect community. And so one time per month, we do these live sessions where we bring on subject matter experts to go deep on a topic that matters to you in finance today. So for those who don't know, CFO Connect is a private community for finance leaders. And our main mission is really just to make your jobs easier and better across sessions like these, reports, content, events. So if you're new to CFO Connect and haven't heard about it before, feel free to have a look in the chats to learn more about the community and how you can get involved. We've got quite a big turnout today, so super excited to go in with Tom. Super relevant topic as we, start to get our legs under us for 2026. So we'll be talking about the CFO agenda of 2026, concretely the impact of AI, navigating today's, let's say, volatile markets in times of uncertainty, and how to build a finance function from the ground up, and a lot more. So Tom is backstage patiently waiting for me to bring him on stage. He has a wealth of experience from Fortune 500 companies and the private equity worlds, over 30 years of experience, having held senior finance roles at giants like PepsiCo and currently working at Oracle NetSuite. If you want to go into the chat, put in your name, put in where you're writing from, and also, why did you join today? Is it because you're facing any kind of pressure from your board? You came to learn something specifically? So the more we know, the more also Tom can help to share his insights from NetSuite. We'll do questions in the chat, of course. We have a Q&A tab. So make sure that you are asking your questions in the Q&A tab, and we will answer them later on in the session by also order of popularity based on votes. One of the best parts is just being active in the chat because everyone here is a finance leader. So please ask questions, share what you're doing, and help each other out in the chat. Lastly, just want to shout out to NetSuite, who is a partner of this session. So first of all, they've been super kind to provide everybody a free resource. So if you go into the resource tab on the right panel, there is a free PDF for you guys to check out called the CFO Agenda 2026. Very relevant. 12 ways to flourish now. So please have a look. For CFO Connect members, you have access to an exclusive discount. That is 40% off of the starter edition, standard, and premium editions of NetSuite, which is a very, very generous and nice discount. And so if you are a CFO Connect member, you can feel free to directly contact Destiny, who will be happy to help you and chat through how her team can help you get onboarded with NetSuite. If you're not a member of CFO Connect, please apply in the link I shared above, and then we can have a chat with the discount stuff. So that's enough from me, enough about the introduction. What I'll do now is I will flip off what I've just shown. I will bring on Tom. Tom, welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, would love to just hear a quick intro about who you are and what you bring to the table.
Certainly. So, you're right. I've been CFO, CIO at many large and small companies alike over the years, ran my own business for about 10 years. And it was really one of these, at the time, it was bringing companies into the cloud, if you will. And quite a lot of the work we did was with NetSuite. My accounting and finance friends, I've gone to the dark side because now I'm in product management. But, in my estimation, who better to know what type of, functionality we need in the product role. And obviously with the advent of AI and the work that we're doing today, I just want to explain to everybody, that is my frame of reference. I think Luke just did a great job. 40% off. Wow. I had no idea, Luke. So that's about me. I've been here, just finished about my 9th year and kind of going into my 10th year. And it's been quite a wild ride. I mean, it's been very rewarding and very interesting. And I think now with what we have in front of us with AI and how it's manifesting itself in the product, people using it, there's a lot of opportunity here, right? So with any great kind of change comes opportunity. And I think it's a matter of, framing your reference as to how you want to do it. So looking forward to this today.
Cool. Thank you, Tom. And yeah, for everyone in the audience, I mean, Tom's here to help, right? And give his insights on what he's seeing. So please feel free to ask questions. So before we get going on questions, we do have a poll for the audience just to see kind of a pulse on what you think AI's impact is. So what I'll do is I'll launch the poll and you can answer it on the right-hand panel just by clicking on poll. And yeah, please go ahead and vote. And then we will have a look at the results. So Tom, the question is, over the next 2-3 years, what is your biggest concern about AI's impact on finance? For you personally, what is your biggest concern before we jump into the results?
My biggest concern, if I'm talking to this group or I'm talking to people that have to deal with this, is in a word, fear. I think anything, fear makes a fool of all of us. Everything we want is on the other side of it. And so when we think about this, we hear about, it's going to take my job away. And we'll talk about some examples of that was not really well founded. I think, as I said before, there's opportunity here. When I look at us, I'm going to say us because I've been in your shoes for many years. I look at it this way, the language of business, finance and accounting, we understand that. Who better to interpret all this stuff for the rest of the organization? So you have that going for you. And now you're going to have this tool, that you can leverage. And we'll talk about some real world examples of it right now, where it's going. So, for the next 2 or 3 years, I would say it's going to be a bit of, if you look at Gartner, they have the hype cycle and then it kind of comes into more of the mainstream. I think we're looking at a 1 to 2 year situation here where we're going to have a lot of functionality being added to applications, even using, pure, LLM models, whatever it is. You're going to have the opportunity to do that. I think it almost comes back to, as they always say, history repeats itself, or fashion always comes back into fashion. When we think about this, number one, it's data and making sure that data is going to be in a great, set so you can unleash AI on it. But then the next thing is, how do you rationalize what to choose? Because there already are a considerable number of options out there. So, having some acumen in it, building some expertise in it right now, almost back to the days of CFOs no longer can just be agnostic to software. They can rely on IT, where I think now it's in many cases in my world, I had IT reporting to me. So you have to have that skill set. And in the US, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Even now in the CPA exam, they test you on it, your IT acumen. So, when we think about this, it's not completely foreign. What is amazing is just how much it can do. The famous phrase, trust but verify, I think is also going to be very important these days. So I probably should be running for office, Luke, because that was a long-winded answer to about 20 minutes. But I think
No,
I
no,
covered it.
I think it was a nice way to set the scene. And it does really tie back to what I'm seeing in the results, right? So 42% of people say quality and reliability of accounting information, which is kind of the thread you were pulling on as well. So it does seem to align well with the general audience sentiments when it comes to the biggest concern of AI's impact on finance.
And Luke
There you
wasn't
go.
me, talking about this.
So now that the poll's over, we will jump into questions. We wanted to start with more of a question to get things warmed up. So I'll flip it on the screen here. For you personally, when it comes to AI, what is your favorite use case at work and in your personal life? Any fun use cases there?
So let's take work first, right? Because that's what we're here for. And I would say this, we're working on quite a few things in the product, so in the core product. But one of the things that I've been using quite extensively is this, what we call the MCP connector. So having this ability to connect to an LLM model, the two that we use right now, Anthropic being one and ChatGPT being the other, but literally being able to interact with the data that's in NetSuite, right? So we have customer data and we're looking at stuff, who's using what and all that, whatever the question might be. And what's happened for me is, the use of Excel, which is both, a help and a hinder, depending on how you want to look at it. What I've found with the LLM model and being able to interact with it, it almost has taken me away from relying on Excel so much, meaning I can query it, prompt it, I get some information back, I can iterate with it. I can almost get to the answer. So if somebody said, what's the break even for a particular product? In past days, I may have generated some reports, downloaded them to Excel, do a little work, and presto, it's whatever, $3,000. But I'm able to do that with these LLM models now. And so that's just one example, but you can go from very simple, something like that, to create a journal entry for me based on this, to build a dashboard on accounts payable if you want. And that to me, from a work standpoint, has been really interactive and really interesting. AI, I would say start there. whatever ERP you're using or system you want to connect to, give that a shot because it'll definitely sharpen your skills and all. From the personal side, I think I've put an email or two to say, make this sound nicer, more collaborative, not the typical CFO, oh, this is so bad, but I'll share something with you all. It's a little personal, it's a little business, but I'm part of a few boards of some companies, and one company in particular, the board would kind of tell the CFO, that, she's very, it's very dry. It's just very, can you make it more exciting? Can you really tell a story? And she was sharing, she has some young children and they love reading Dr. Seuss. And I said, what if we took the results for the quarter and we wrote a script like Dr. Seuss would write a book about it? And I'm going to just to the group out there, this is a private company and the results are really good. So let's just set it up that way. But what she did is we worked through this thing, we iterated it, and the first line I remember to bring it started out with, in the town of, and I'm not going to name the name of the company, where profits abound, revenues are racing up while costs were slinking down. And it's pretty obvious that this business has now turned around. And so the board was a little taken aback at first, but when we went to dinner that night, a lot of them were saying to me, that's like the first board meeting where we went through the financials. And I can tell you what the percent increase was on this particular product's margin because she had woven it all. So when we talk about AI and how you're going to use this thing, the big thing I think a lot of us have to work on is our communication skills. So while I'm not professing you go and do everything in the Dr. Seuss rhyme pentameter or whatever, but it was great, and when you think about what are you trying to do, you're trying to communicate information, and she did a masterful job. And I'll swear, everybody remembered pretty much everything about that presentation on the financials. So,
Wow. The power of storytelling, right? And how to build relationships with your board. I didn't expect that as an answer. Super interesting use case there. Thank you. Thanks for that. Now, jumping into next question, I'd love to know. So I think when you hear about AI implementation, there's now this idea that you're going to be reducing headcount, right? And trying to cut costs that way. How do you view that, right? Those two things, and how do they kind of hang in the balance?
I would position it this way. I don't think we really know the extent either way. I think the reality is there will be some reduction. There's studies out there that say by the year 2030, there'll be no more quote unquote manual data input. It'll all be automated, right? So whether that's an invoice, bill, whatever, these things, and some of it's happening today, with accounts payable, you have scan and capture. And so some of this has already come to roost, if you will. So there's opportunity, I think, in that area from a standpoint to reskill people. So when you take this, the next question is, okay, well, if that job is going away, what jobs are going to be created? And this too is, I think, something where we don't really know everything, but some of the obvious ones are, the governance side of things, being able to audit, judgment, critical thinking on certain aspects. Because I think as, we talked about the data, it's one thing to have the data. It's another thing to see what, AI comes back with. And then does it make sense? You really need to have it prove its work. The nice thing I can tell you with that in terms of some of the interaction I've had and what we're working and testing on is it may come back with information and you can then say, prove your work, or I don't think this is right. And you can iterate with it, not unlike the MCP model. So when I talk about, this headcount piece and the other, jobs that are coming up, I would encourage everybody to bone up on that, because I go back to before what I said is, you're the closest to what's going on. And let's just say data input goes away. There's a lot people would learn about data input, some of the nuances of how a particular vendor or customer or whatever it might be. So you have this knowledge. Now you need to apply it in a different way. So I'd encourage everybody to, look at things and see where there might be a good avenue for them to move up to. And even if you're in your current role, you always look at, what's the job, trajectory, what I, position to position. The other, I'll just give you a corollary for those of you, I live in the US and I'm in the state of Minnesota, which has a very famous medical company called the Mayo Clinic. And what was interesting is in 2016, Jeffrey Hinton, father of AI, made a comment that if you are in radiology, you need to find another job because AI is going to replace you. And it was a probably well-founded comment at the time. So let's fast forward to today with this. And so there's probably about 700, probably more now, last time I read, of these LLMs that have been approved by the FDA here in the US, which means they can take these LLM modules and unleash them on images, MRI images, if you will, and interpret them and all. And so you would think, oh, well, that's taken away all the doctors. Well, no, that's not what's happened. So in the case of the Mayo Clinic, since 2016, they've increased radiology headcount by 55%. They have over 400 radiologists working at the Mayo Clinic now. And you ask, well, why is that? The MRI is being interpreted by an LLM. Well, then the question is, so if the MRI is interpreting an LLM and comes up with all this information, who's absorbing that? And then who's talking to the patient? So what's happened here is if you also look at, there's a thing called the Javon's paradox is about in coal, there was like a better way more efficient way to burn coal. What ended up happening is they thought, okay, there's going to be less coal used because we have a more efficient way of burning it. Well, what happened is it was more efficient, cheaper. So more people started to use it. They actually had an increase in the reserve or in the usage of coal. So when we look at this scenario I'm talking about now with these LLMs, the radiologists interpreting them, the cost of interpreting a scan is cheaper now. So where hospitals here in the US may have in the past, we only use these in special cases because they take a long time to read, the cost has actually come down. So they're doing a lot more of them. So what's happened is you've had this kind of increase in the number of radiologists. Now, to be fair, it's required radiologists to do things a little bit differently, right? Because in the past, they would be looking at the scan and they'd be trying to think about in their world what's going on. Now these LLMs are doing it for them, and they're more in a position to use their critical judgment, their experience, probably in a way that gives them much more information to really come up with better treatment, programs for particular patients. So I'm just saying, correlate that to what we do in accounting and finance. What do? We look at the information, we interpret it, we try to explain it to the organization so that they know whether it's a KPI or you're working closely with a division leader. Here's what you should be doing. And more importantly, here's why you should be doing it. And so everybody can internalize it and they can know I take these actions, things should go much better.
Gotcha. So it's really a shift from the Excel number crunching skill set to more maybe people oriented, building a narrative, telling a story internally across different functions. You think that's the kind of the biggest gap that finance leaders have now when you think about going to this next paradigm of
Now,
AI?
I've seen improvement in terms of how finance and accounting people, communicate in terms of what they do. I think it's been, not just the advent of AI, but probably since, the late 1990s into the 2000s, you have to be able to tell a story. More importantly, I mean, think about this. When we talk about sales, what do we want them to do? We want them to be able to interact with the customer and give them, factual reasons as to why you want to buy this product. What will it do for you? I think you have to look at yourself in a similar way. You're not necessarily selling a product to your colleagues, but what you're selling to them is kind of a path to success. And so being able to do that in an articulate way, but I think very importantly, what everybody expects of us is not just to be articulate, but to be very factual, meaning that there's not a lot of interpretation and there's a direct cause and effect, a causal link to what you're asking them to do and why. So it's one thing to say you should do this because we're going to sell more. That's not very impactful or whatever. But if you can craft it a different way, if you do these activities, look at what's going to happen to the organization. The organization is going to improve because your area costs are going to go down. If costs go down, we make more profit. We make more profit. You get a bigger bonus. Boom, boom. Have compelling, communication as you go through your job. The compelling, message I think is going to be important. But at the end of the day, in all of this, it has to be factual, right? It can't just be, you can't hallucinate like AI agents can do sometimes. That is not something that is going to be acceptable in your role.
I have a lot of other follow-up questions to that, but I really want to stay also on the agenda. So we'll move on to the next question. A bit more on the technical side. You kind of already mentioned this term in a previous answer, but tell me about MCP and AI connectors. I think that's more on the technical IT side. How do you see that coming into play for a finance leader?
So probably the biggest example I can give you is in today, you have all these protocols and APIs. So if you were going to connect to, let's say, a payroll system, a CRM system, an ERP system, you're going to have three separate APIs, et cetera. You've got three languages that you're dealing with. Probably what is most compelling about these MCP capabilities is you just have one connector to three systems or whatever it may be, and you have one language. So in terms of the management of that, I would say number one, it makes it much more easier, much more, straightforward in terms of what you're dealing with. The second piece of it is really being able to interact with your data, right? And so in the case of NetSuite, if most of our customers will run all that on our system because you have CRM, you have payroll, you have ERP or accounting in there. And so you can just, iterate on that data. The other thing that happens if you do have these other systems, at least what I've found is, go back to the days of whether it's like data warehousing or whatever, and you have three different systems. What's the exercise you have to do? You got to take this system, you got to normalize the data, put it in the data warehouse, go to the other system, do the same. So now it's comparable, it's contextualized. The thing I like about working NetSuite or having everything in one platform, because there's other ERPs that do this, you now just have everything that is technically contextualized. It's right for you to be able to interact with. The data's right. I think in this day, when you have disparate systems, what people have to spend time doing, which is a good thing, I think MCP helps them get that data right, I don't know, for lack of a better term, so that they can actually use it. I find that initiative or that exercise happens a lot quicker, leveraging these MCP tools to do that. But the point I would make most importantly is once you get this data right, is how quickly you can go back and forth with it. And how I kind of look at it as like, it's like you're working with another colleague in a sense, and you're interacting with them. So just like take accounts payable. If somebody said to you, can you just analyze accounts payable and give me some information on certain vendors and who's taking a long time to pay and who's not? Why are they taking a long time to pay? I mean, just think about how you would approach that. Even if you had NetSuite, right? You're going to generate certain reports. You're going to look at the AP aging. You're going to go through all this stuff. But you can do that so much quicker with an MCP tool because you don't need to look at every vendor on the aging. You don't even generate the AR aging report. You can just go and leverage that information right now and pinpoint those items you want or those vendors you want. And then you can drill further down on what the difference is between these and how bills are paid, not just in terms of time, but now you can look at, in the case of what we have in NetSuite, is you have notes on these vendors, what they do. So the agent now can go and interpret these notes. And you can start to find out things like, well, one of these companies has outsourced this AP to a third party. And when you hear that, at least in my experience, that just means they're not paying this bill until 75 days have elapsed. And conversely, you have other vendors that are saying, we're providing you with raw materials. I don't care who you have managing it. You need to pay us in 30 days. I think intuitive as to what's really driving some of the, I don't know if anomalies is the right word, but let's say differences between vendors and what's impacting, DPO and things of that nature. So MCP tools, I would think right now, I would encourage people, if you haven't used them, start using them. I think you'll be pretty amazed about how quick you can turn around some of these analyses and quite frankly, how exact you can get them to be.
Thanks for that. And I think, one thing I hear a lot is the concern about data and maintaining clean data, because obviously it's garbage in, garbage out, right? And if you really want to make the most of these tools, you need to have really sturdy data organization, orchestration. How do you see that at NetSuite, for example? And are there any ways that you're auditing or checking to make sure that the data is indeed correct?
So I'll speak about NetSuite and how we go about it. In our world, we have over what we call 1,000 business objects around the suite, whether that's sitting in the CRM module, the accounting module, field service, whatever it is. You have these business objects that are capturing data. There you have 10,000, let's say 10,000 plus of these transaction objects that are happening. And so together with these, what they're doing is they're capturing data. So an example I could give would be, how is this contextualized? How is it correlated? So if I have, let's say a customer and finance puts that customer on credit hold, let's just say that sales rep sitting in the parking lot going and talk to the customer, right? This is, hypothetical, but they're going to immediately get notified that, that has occurred, and they can go in and talk to the customer, rectify it. But that point now, I have something happening in finance and something happening in the CRM, and now they're connected. So now when I'm looking at this data, I want to start working on this data. I'm not just looking at it kind of, univariate. I'm looking at it as in multivariate because I've got different aspects that are all connected to this data point. So I don't want to get too deep on this, but you can imagine when we talk about data and how you're going to interact with it or how the agent's going to come in and look at it, the more context you can give it, the better it's going to be. This is true. I don't want you to judge us here at Oracle NetSuite, but we're working on coming up with automated journal entries and these other stuff. And so I said to somebody who was not an accountant, they said, well, what's like a detailed journal entry? I said, well, I don't know, we have our own chatbot. I said, go in there and ask it, for some detailed journal entries. And the person said, She sent it to me and it said, give me a detailed 5-line journal entry. You know what the agent came back with? Came back with, it was a great day. It was a hard day at work, but it was rewarding. I went home and had a good dinner and then read a good book. But the point to be made is, so when I talk about MCP and prompting, I believe me, I've made the same mistake. We talk about context. That's a very simple example, but when we think about the data point I was just mentioning, something as simple as that, having that contextualized and ready to be acted upon. So, depending upon whatever prompt or interaction you're doing with the system, to make sure that you're going to be getting a well rounded perspective on that data point or data points. So, when we talk about data, yeah, I mean, I don't think we get away from that, because we have AI. What I can tell everybody is AI actually helps us to be a lot more efficient in getting that data right if we have to go through that exercise. It's not going to be as daunting as it once was, but in all honesty, it's not like you just tell AI fix this. That is not how it's going to work. You have to interact with it. But once you
Right.
do, comes quicker. You can come up with I think analyses faster and better.
We're a bit over halfway through the conversation. So for the audience members, feel free to ask any questions in Q&A. We've got a few more questions here planned, but happy to also answer yours live on the fly as well. So feel free to drop those in. Now, shifting gears a bit, this question was submitted by a registrant, David, who is based in the US. And he has actually allowed me to learn a new acronym called VUCA. So when navigating VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, the market has been extremely challenging. So how do we, so this was not correctly spelled, but sorry. How do we actually make this an opportunity in times of crisis?
All of us have been through putting together the plan or budget, doing the forecast. Maybe you do one every month. What I would tell you is with a lot of the tools that are out there today, whether it's what we use at Oracle NetSuite or planning and budgeting tool or EPM offering or other companies that are out there, I would say these applications, depending upon which one, some of them have quite a bit of AI embedded in them. One of the things that we recently came out with is this thing I was talking about, forecast or variables, univariate, multivariate, really being able to do multivariate forecasting, but being able to do it really quickly because, the more variables you have, the much more difficult that equation gets to, be solved. But I would really encourage everybody to, decide what tool is right for you and start using it because, it's one thing to say we have chaos. And then how do you find out the opportunities? Well, I think you find out the opportunities, quite frankly, by testing assumptions. And I think we all know, I mean, I worked at PepsiCo for many years, and I can just tell you when I was in the financial analyst group, my weekend was ruined when the product manager for Diet Orange Slice decided to change the volume forecast for 6-pack cans. So that was a whole weekend of rerunning numbers. In this day and age, you literally can just press a button and change the assumption and get a new perspective. The other thing to point out is you can also factor in outside influences that may be happening, tariffs and how they change. I'll leave it at that since I'm here in the US. No more comments, and please be nice in the comment section. But that to be said, being able to quickly change from a 50% impact on your business to a 15 or a 10 or whatever the number is going to be and rerun the numbers, and we can absorb this for customers, and we need to impart some of the increase to the customer or all of it, depending upon what decision is. You can make those assumptions and you can do them very quickly and see what the impact is going to be on your business. So it's going to be how quick can you do it on analysis. And in the MCP tool example, you could use them to do some of this stuff, but I just think it's better to have more rigor in that. So literally have, your business modeled, if you will, but then as assumptions change, and being able to leverage a tool that's going to quickly run those assumptions through and going back to the trust but verify, interpret them, absorb them, make sure that, it makes sense or, change assumptions. Maybe there's other things you can do that could mitigate some of the tariffs, cost savings, let's say in other places, or, a price increase, which essentially is, you could argue is the same thing as passing along the tariff rate to the end customer. But if you're really going to be able to turn on a dime with how fast things are changing these days and not, AI and, what's happening? Am I going to have a headcount increase in accounting finance or is it going to be a decrease? And how do I fill these positions? And we have a talent shortage in accounting and finance. So all these things, you can have certain people leverage managing certain parts of your model and make sure that you can focus individually and you can focus holistically. So,
And just to follow up on this, sounds like you're talking more about financial planning tools in general.
Yeah.
For you, what's the tipping point going from as a company going from the Excel to like more of a robust tool in FP&A? Is there
Well,
like some kind of criteria you should be looking at for that?
I think it would come down, whether variables is the right term or a term or the size of your business. If you have a pretty simplistic business, you're selling three or four services, you have three people and your SKUs are not exorbitant. You could probably get by with Excel, if you're looking to save money or, there's some tools out there that are very cost effective. But if you're, any company of size, 25 employees on up with, variable channels, markets, you got to be realistic about this. And this is, I've been in software for 9 years, so take this with a grain of salt. Well, it's for my body. I'm going to pay for, doctor visits or I'm going to pay for this. Yet, what does the doctor do? They diagnose you with tools and tests and everything. Yet when we get into business, it's like, how do I get by with the least amount of being able to monitor technically this body? And it's kind of weird. Like, would you go to, I don't know, somebody who doesn't have a doctor's credentials to, diagnose your illness, or would you kind of go to somebody who's got more credentials and has, the tools and the capabilities at hand to be able to give you? So I would just say, don't be penny wise and pound foolish on this, because at the end of the day, you really have to be able to diagnose what's going on. And with everything is changing these days, I would highly encourage you to find a tool that's going to work right for you, both in terms of cost effectiveness and being able to get you the answers you need quickly and effectively.
Thanks for that, Tom. Just seeing that there is a question in the Q&A that popped up, so we'll just jump on that one immediately. Question from Ida: how do you think, Tom, to train their team to think and interact with other departments? So we talked about storytelling, building a narrative, building alliances across the business, right? I know this is a broad question, but any initial thoughts there?
If you move into a new town and you don't have any friends, what are you going to do to make friends? You're going to make an effort, right? Whatever that might be, church, social, whatever. You're going to do something to kind of get out there and, introduce yourself to folks, if you will. I think in a business, it may be a little bit easier as far as making new friends. But what I really think you got to do, go to whoever the department head is and ask them, can I work on the production line for a week? Can I go on a route truck drive with one of the route truck drivers? Can I go and do things that'll expose me to how does the business really work? What is the day-to-day activities that are happening? How can I really, absorb what's going on and then equate that to the numbers that you're responsible for? I say that in light of, especially we're talking about, communication skills. You can practice those and you can, those are not necessarily department specific, if you will. But what I really do think that you can do is you can reach out to your colleagues. And I think, you know, think about what I was talking about. It's human nature. I think the best thing that people like describing is themselves. And if you can show interest, and I'm interested in what you do in sales, I'm interested in what you do in manufacturing, put yourself out there, so to speak. Everybody's human. You might have people that are very open and willing. You might have people that don't want you involved at all in their discipline, if you will. But, if you take three swings, I think you're going to hit the ball twice and maybe miss once. You'll be that much better and you can keep working through things. And easier said than done. But I think once you do it, in my own experience, I can tell you it's made me much more effective because I can intuitively understand what's happening because I know what's happening on the manufacturing floor, how people do it. And, surprisingly, I've actually come up with some recommendations for things in manufacturing and sales that they actually adopted and made it better. Who would have thought an accountant can actually do that? So we're pretty good at what we do. I think the more exposure we can get, the more knowledge we can get, the better we're going to be.
Another question that just came in from, I think it's Jaime Rendon. So thank you for the question. He's asking you, Tom, how do you approach being relevant for the customer and prospect more than just differentiating from the competitors with NetSuite?
So interestingly enough, I do go on a lot of sales calls, both in our current customers, we call it account management, and direct, where we're actually having prospects. And, how do I keep it relevant? It's very simply this. Because, I've had experience with the product, so I've used it, I've lived it, I can, feel their pain or don't feel their pain. What I've always said when I have my own business and when I do some of these calls or go on customer visits, I talk about my view, my role is I need to make your life better. And, what do you mean make my life better? This is work. And my next response is, well, in most cases, in this day and age, let's say we're working, I can honestly say probably 2/3 of my waking hours are spent working. And so if that is how much we're doing, or even if let's say it's 50%, whatever it may be, you're doing a lot of time at work. So how do I make it relevant? That's how I start. So there's my sales pitch. But then from there, once you've done that, you have to then ask, what are you struggling with? What's happening? And there's easy things like in our case, a lot of companies that are going on IPO, they come to us because as one person described it, and this kind of hurt my ego after my explanation of how NetSuite can make you, more streamlined and focused and process and everything's gonna be great. The person said, yeah, it's kind of like a closet organizer. And I was like, yeah, I guess, yeah, that's kind of what it is. It's a closet organizer. The point being is it can put things in a order and a process that's going to help you be able to, not waste time on going down different rabbit holes of how we should do a process or whatever. But then the nice thing about it is, let's say you've done that, you've adopted the process, but then you actually can figure out a better way to do it. The nice thing about NetSuite is it is flexible where you can redesign that process and still use it. And I like to say people that get up to speed on it pretty quickly, you can actually use your expertise and resources to actually maybe even do it yourself. So, making it relevant, I think really comes down to how is it ultimately going to make their lives better, which really articulates to how are we going to make their job easier to do, or how are we going to make them better at their job? And the last thing, this is not our sale. I'm just going to say this, Luke. We base it on roles. So what does that mean? The way I would position it is I say, the person in charge of accounts payable, you're no longer the, accounts payable lead or accounts payable clerk. You're the CEO of accounts payable. And I always get like, I'm the CEO of accounts payable. What does that mean? I said, well, when you log into the system, you have a dashboard and you have all these pieces that's there that are meaningful to you. Those that you can impact directly, those that if you impact these directly, these will trend more positively. The point I'm making is you boil it down to the role we play in an organization and then articulate that role to the individual so that they can be most impactful, most efficient, do the best job as possible. And by the way, hopefully be able to go to that football game. And because this is a multi-nation thing, I'm saying football in the light of what we say here in America, soccer. So you can go to the football game for your son or daughter and enjoy it and don't have to worry about, your information isn't accurate, compliant, and you're able to close the books.
Actually, Jaime just replied and said, great answer, and thanks to you. So nail on the head. Perfect. There is one question that I really want to hear your answer on, and I also want to pull the audience on this one too. So what I'll do is I'll launch this poll, and then Tom will ask you the question, and then we can look at the answer afterwards. The poll that I'll launch now is, which statement best reflects where your finance org is today on AI and automation? So please feel free to answer that. And my relevance-ish question to you, Tom, on this is, if you were starting a finance org from scratch today in today's environment, considering AI, geopolitics, risks, market dynamics, where would you start? How would you build it? What are a few kind of like approaches that you would take to this?
Probably the first thing I would say is fundamentals. And what I mean by that is, going back to my language of business comment, making sure that people have a good foundation in whatever the role that you want them to fill, whether it's going to be on the accounting side or the financial analysis side of the shop. And I think once you have that, I think really the next thing you have to look for is attitude. Because I'm a firm believer of this. Somebody once said, nothing great has ever been accomplished without enthusiasm. So, my comment to everybody, and this is not just building from scratch. You can look at your own group right now. Put them in the roles and the positions that they want to be in. And what I mean by that is this. Years ago when I was at college, I played football and I was literally the field goal kicker. And the coach at the first day of practice said, I want everybody to go to the position that they want to play. And everybody was looking at themselves like, what? And, most people went to the position they were playing, but we had one 320-pound linebacker who went to the quarterback thing. I went to the quarterback thing, by all means, field goal kicker and quarterback, about the same. But long story short, what ended up happening is they did have some people move. And it's a team, right? So you have a finance team, people went to different positions. and some self-selected out to say, yeah, maybe this isn't what I thought it was, grass greener. So what you ended up happening is you had quite a level of enthusiasm from the team because you had some people that because they were able to do this other position, they were performing at a higher level. They worked harder in terms of their workouts. They lifted weights more. They ate better. It had this, trickle down effect, for lack of a better term, on the group. So when you're looking at a finance group, whether you have one today that's built or you're starting one from scratch, I think you need to look at fundamentals first. I think the next thing has to be attitude and make sure they're good, excited. And then the biggest thing you have to do is if you have people that are fundamentally sound, have a great attitude, it's your job not to put out the fire that they have. So you have to be able to manage that group in a way that you're going to get the most out of them and make sure that they're most excited, most enthusiastic in the roles that they are. I've used this. This has kind of been a similar question in the last thing. And somebody came in with the question and they said, you're talking about accounting and enthusiasm. I think that's an oxymoron. So at any event, I took a great homage to that. And I was like, no, it is, you can be enthusiastic about accounting. It's all a matter of perspective and how you do it. So that was kind of a little bit of a Pollyanna answer, but I can tell you, I was just reading something yesterday about one of the co-founders of Anthropic, and she has a degree in the humanities. And that's what they hire. They hire a lot of people who have, degrees in the humanities and the arts. Blows me away, but I will tell you, Anthropic's product, I mean, we chose it because it's really good and I love working with it. So they're doing something right there. So again, don't limit your horizons in terms of what you're looking for. And so when I go back to the fundamentals, you're probably saying, well, wait a minute, how is somebody going to know what accounting policy is? Well, if somebody is well served and is articulate and can read and understand stuff, are you going to tell me they can't go and read some accounting pronouncements and become an expert on revenue recognition or whatever else it might be? You may really surprise yourself in terms of the team you can build if you take this approach.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. And I think, one follow-up question that's also tied to the poll is, where are people currently with AI and automation in their finance teams? And how does that also play in building a successful finance team in today's world? So when I look at the results, it looks like 47% are still exploring concepts and don't have any defined use cases. And then secondly, still a large majority are just running small pilots in limited areas. Is for you, is that surprising or pretty standard to hear? And also, how do you think about that within like the building of the finance team?
I think you do is you need to give them I can use the fish tank analogy, right? So if I buy a certain fish and it's supposed to grow to a certain length, but the fish tank is of certain dimensions, the fish is only going to grow to a certain dimension. It's not going to grow to its full length because it's hindered by, the size of the environment. So if you take that and you apply it to what's going on in finance right now, and I hear, oh, we're just doing some projects, we're just doing, thinking about it or whatever, I would say, let's get a little action going. Give them a bigger fish tank to swim in. I'm not saying that, you just say, go do something. I mean, yeah, have parameters, talk about it as a team, but, take the leap of faith, if you will, because I think the longer you wait, the, bigger fire hose you're going to have to drink from, if you will. I just would say, it's as with anything, it would be, there's always going to be a learning curve. There's always going to be something new. And even, being able to start getting involved, even within the core system, we have the product called Ask Oracle, which is like Chat GPT within the system. It can come back with information and it may not be exactly right. And you have to train it to say, no, that's the wrong thing to be looking at. You need to look at this report or you need to look at this information. And that information, is not something that's part of this analysis. So even that little thing, which I think most of us do with all of our analyses these days, to know how to do it in a different environment. So, as with anything, I'm not telling everybody be an early adopter and go big bang, but I think with anything like this, that I think we can all agree this is going to be around for quite a while. You have, you know, countless number of data centers going up around the globe that are fairly, significant in size. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason why so many companies are involved in this is because the compute power that's going to be necessary implies, it's going to be here for a while. So my advice to people is I would move a little more quickly right now. I think there's more definition about it. I don't think it's as, new or mysterious as it once was. So I would encourage you to ask your teams, see what they say. I can't imagine they're going to say, I don't want to do AI. I don't want to get, I would imagine they want to get going on it because like I said before, there'll be different roles down the road and they could probably be ready to jump into those roles.
We are just at the almost the top of the hour, so we will take just one more or two questions. So Jaime once again has asked another question. So thank you, Jaime, for being the start student here. He's asking kind of about the first part of your answer on this question, which was, building a successful finance team from scratch. And based on what you shared regarding attitude for the teamwork, he's asking that you please share how you see the part of emotional and executive intelligence playing a part. Is it a pillar to make things happen, focused on empathy, risk tolerance, and resilience?
Because it is something that I've tried to improve all my life, personal and professionally, the emotional intelligence piece of this. How do you test for that? Well, I think you can, don't have a normal interview. What I do with a lot of people when I interview them, we go for a walk if they're able to walk, and it's amazing. You get out in a different environment, things become more relaxed, people can open up. And I don't do it like, gotcha. I just want to know, what makes this person tick. A lot of the persons I ask are about the individual. Yeah, I can read off of their resume what they've done, what they do, and I can pretty much infer from that as long as they're, truthful. Again, you'll verify it with, following up on references, but they pretty much, they can do the job. That's why you're actually talking to them. The piece that's probably not in there as we get into this emotional intelligence is, try to ask them questions about it, see how they've interacted in the past where, maybe they were, embarrassed about something by somebody. How do they do it? Or somebody went behind their back and, how did you react to that? That can tell you a lot about a person in terms of, number one, maybe how they reacted. And then number two, the learnings they have from it. So, emotional intelligence, I think is very important. There's also another one I would tell you, I think it's called adaptability quotient that you should look at, which is, people who are able to, get knocked down and get back up. And I would argue in the accounting and finance profession, I think the accounting profession, that is definitely another trait you need in this group because you will have some failures. You will have some challenges. Things aren't always going to go the way you want. And, there's a little bit of a blurred line between these two things, but I think those two are very important. And if I had to tell you just for one thing, because I'm an ex-baseball player too, and I do a lot of baseball coaching these days. And I always love to say that, if you're going to hire somebody, hire an ex-baseball player. And people go like, why? The baseball players usually aren't that intelligent. And I said, well, that may be true, but they're very trainable and they have an incredible adaptability quotient because you can be successful 30% of the time and be the best player in the league. So in terms of, 3 hits out of 10 at bats. So I'm sorry to digress there, folks, but those are things I think you have to work at. I don't know if there's a secret sauce to it, but you got to almost goes back to communication. So when you do get into those interviews, being able to connect with the individual on a level that you're going to be able to feel comfortable in terms of how, they're going to come in and be part of your team.
Tom, I think we're gonna end here. They always say end on a high note. So that was, I think, a really nice, well structured answer there. And so we will wrap it up. So thanks again to Tom for spending an hour of his time with us, answering all your questions in the audience, answering questions about AI and everything else. Thank you to the audience who took an hour out of your day, join us, talk with us, ask questions, and learn. We hope that you came away with this conversation with at least maybe one tidbit of information that now you can go back to your work with and be a better finance professional. As a reminder, this recording will be shared via email after this session. We will also have information on how you can connect with NetSuite team for that discount. Again, feel free to connect with Tom on LinkedIn. His LinkedIn profile is in the chat. And we will be back next month for another webinar. So thanks again, everybody, and we will see you on the next one.